La Présidente.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. We meet here today to discuss Hamas's terror attack in Israel and the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, as EU leaders met yesterday in an extraordinary European Council meeting. The Al-Ahli Arabi Baptist Hospital in Gaza was bombed and hundreds of innocent lives were lost. The devastation of the hospital is horrific and unjustifiable, and we must ensure we continue to shed light on what happened. As the tragedy in the Middle East continues to unfold, it is once again the innocent who are forced to pay the price. We must remain clear that protecting civilian lives must keep being a priority. We cannot lose sight of the humanitarian consequences. This has always been our core message. So this House remembers the victims as we keep pushing for a way forward in the region. I will now give the floor to Minister Alvarez for the Council, after which I will give the floor to the High Representative and then the President of the Commission. Minister, the floor is yours.
Estimada Presidenta del Parlamento Europeo.
President of the European Parliament, President of the Commission, High Representative, ladies and gentlemen. This morning we woke up to the news of the atrocious attack on the Al-Ahli hospital, which has caused hundreds of Palestinian victims. Hospitals and civilians cannot be a target. The suffering of the civilian population of Gaza needs to end. We also are deeply moved, shocked by the terrible terrorist attack that Israel suffered on the 7th of October, which caused over 2,000 dead and 200 hostages, and we call for the immediate and unconditional release of those hostages. We would like to express our solidarity and support to the families of all victims, their loved ones, and the friends of Israel and Palestine. I'd also like to express my condolences to France, Belgium, and Sweden for the terrible attacks suffered during the last couple of days. We need to preserve cohesion, tolerance, and understanding in our society, because that is what Europe stands for. This is a very serious situation, and Europe needs to be faithful to its principles, supporting the fight against terrorism and acting to support the civilian population. We need to fly the flag of international humanitarianism, and we also need to fly the flag of peace. That's what our citizens expect of us, and so do our friends and partners across the world. We firmly, without ifs and buts, condemn these acts of terrorism and violence. Barbarity cannot triumph. We recognise Israel's right to defend itself against this terrorist attack. This defence needs to take place with the most scrupulous respect for international humanitarian law. The civilian population cannot be a victim. We need to allow humanitarian access to Gaza. We need to ensure basic supplies for the population: water, electricity, food, medicines. We need at all costs to avoid escalation in the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. Our friends and partners across the world expect the voice and actions of Europe to be raised and for us to act in accordance with that desire. We cannot allow the forced displacement of hundreds of thousands of people. We must at all times distinguish between terrorist objectives and the civilian population. Assistance and cooperation from Europe to the Palestinian National Authority and the people of Palestine shouldn't be interrupted. In fact, it should be boosted. And therefore, the Commission announcement of the tripling of humanitarian assistance is very important. That's what our citizens expect, and that's what our partners across the world expect. With that goal, Spanish assistance will be further providing a further €4 million to Palestine by the end of the year, added to the 21 million already provided. Humanitarian principles need to be emphasised clearly in the same way as we affirm and continue to affirm our condemnation of terrorism and Israel's rights to defend itself against terrorism, because that is precisely what distinguishes nations that love peace from terrorists. We need to differentiate between Hamas and the Palestinian people and the Palestinian National Authority. We shouldn't confuse Hamas with the legitimate leadership of the Palestinians. The Palestinian Authority has for a long time been Europe's partner for peace. Hamas does not represent the Palestinian people. During these terrible moments, we must at all costs avoid the regional extension of the conflict. Europe and Spain are committed to peace and stability in the region. Our number one goal needs to be maintaining peace and stability in the West Bank and in Lebanon. The situation in Lebanon is of particular concern. This is a fragile country. The UN force, commanded by the Spanish General Lazaro, is doing extraordinary work in very difficult circumstances to comply with its mandate and maintain stability in the region. Europe needs to stand shoulder to shoulder with Lebanon, basing ourselves on an agenda of peace and stability. We need a vision of Lebanon as a state, which is the necessary condition for the people there to be able to face the challenges that they have. We cannot allow anyone to make use of this tragedy for their own ends. But we also today need to start thinking about the day when this latest spiral of violence ends. We need to put an end to this tragedy which has taken place too many times. We need to find a solution for once and for all, the two-state solution, Israel and Palestine, living in peace and security, one next to the other. And this requires a definitive agreement in line with agreements that have already been signed and parameters agreed during the conference in Madrid. Once we overcome this crisis, we need to move forward with this agenda urgently. Emotions are running high, and sometimes these emotions are contradictory, and it's precisely because of that that we need to be particularly responsible and particularly careful with regard to what we say and how we say it, when we say it too. Europe firmly condemns terrorism and violence, and we'd like to express our solidarity with the victims without distinguishing between their religion and nationality. Europe is mobilizing to promote firm humanitarian action based in the universal values of humanity. Europe needs to act together to demand that this tragedy is not repeated, and this will only be possible if we can offer the Palestinian people and also the people of Israel a perspective based on a credible and definitive peace. And this requires a two-state solution, the Israeli state and the Palestinian state living together in peace and security. That's what the peoples of the region and the world have wanted for decades. I firmly believe that. Our friends in the region and our citizens expect clarity and firmness from the European Union, a firm commitment against terrorism, against violence, a firm commitment to peace, to justice, to humanity. And we need to come together with all parties and with our Arab and international partners to ensure that this genuinely is the last time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. I give the floor now to the High Representative for Foreign Affairs, Josep Borrell. Isabel, have the floor.
Señora Presidenta del Parlamento, señora Presidenta.
President of the Parliament, President of the Commission, Minister, ladies and gentlemen. These are times of high emotion. Feelings are running very high. We need to call to the voice of reason here. We need to move past the emotions that are caused by the tragic events that we've been seeing. We've all firmly condemned the undescribable horror of the attacks suffered by Israel, the attacks against the civilian population which left so many dead, that have affected so many defenseless people when they were celebrating life and they suddenly found themselves faced with death. Let's say it again. Let's condemn these attacks again, and let's say that, of course, Israel has the right to defend itself. Anyone attacked in this brutal manner would have that right. I think we also stand together to say that the right to defend yourself, like all rights, has limits, and these, in this case, are marked by international law, in particular international humanitarian law. All of this is clear, and we can repeat it, but repeating it will bring us nowhere. Yes, we condemn these terrible terrorist attacks, but I think we also have to condemn the civilian victims that we have in Gaza now. There are around 3,000 of them, because condemning one tragedy shouldn't prevent us speaking out against another. We condemn the terrorist attacks, but that doesn't stop us showing our feelings for other victims. These are tragic times, and I think that at this time the European Union needs to base its response on 4 principles: firmness, humanity, consistency, and a proactive political attitude to the conflict. Being firm begins with a clear condemnation of Hamas. And as the Minister said, they should not be identified with the people of Palestine. For us, Hamas is a terrorist organisation, and they've shown that we're quite right to call them that with their acts of recent days. Hamas has been boycotting any effort to make peace. It stood against UN resolutions, it stood against resolutions from the Arab League, which provided a possible path to peace between Israel and Palestine. Hamas wants to eradicate Israel from the map. They don't want peace, they want destruction. But it's becoming impossible for the Palestinians to achieve a fair peace. They're also the victims of Hamas. But we can't make the Palestinian people and the inhabitants of Gaza can't be made responsible for the terrorist actions of Hamas. Being firm also means calling for the release of the hostages, and this links in with our second principle for action, which is humanity. Wars also have rules. Wars are terrible things. And what we've seen, this bomb explosion in the hospital, which we don't yet know to whom it should be attributed, is another terrible manifestation of what goes on. But war has to be carried out in line with international rules, and we've said it in other contexts. Cutting water supplies and food off from civilian populations isn't in line with the rules of war. There's no water coming into Gaza now. Over 3,000 dead. over a quarter of them children. We cannot make the people of Gaza responsible for the terrible actions of Hamas. The third principle, political coherence. And I think it's fair to say that all of us agree on what I've just said. We reject Hamas, and we want to see international humanitarian law respected by all sides. We want to see attacks against defenceless civilians end, regardless of where they are. And we need to ensure that the actions of member states are in line with the common action of the European Union, and we need to ensure that EU policies are in line with what we want to see. And this raises the issue of assistance to the Palestinian Authority and the issue of humanitarian assistance to the victims in Gaza, and the decision of the President of the Commission to multiply our humanitarian aid by 3 is a good example of this political coherence. Unfortunately, obviously, humanitarian assistance needs to get into Gaza, and it can't at the moment because all ways in are closed. The Egyptian foreign minister has asked again and again for the bombardments against infrastructure to stop so that humanitarian aid could go into Gaza. The fourth principle is the one that we need to invest most political energy into, I think, which is a proactive attitude to resolve the conflict. I was in Gaza in 2008 during the attacks that took place then. I've now observed 4 wars like this one, and I firmly believe that if we don't stop the cycle of violence, it'll happen again in a few years' time. We need to end this conflict between Israel and Palestine, because peace between Arab countries and Israel, which is good news, doesn't automatically bring peace between Israel and Palestine, which needs to be achieved. An Israeli reservist who was called up said to the press that the most powerful army to defend his country would be peace. While there's no peace, there'll be no army that's powerful enough to guarantee Israel's peace. But peace will not come about automatically. Peace has to be built. We should recognize that the international community of which we're a part has not done everything necessary to ensure that the Oslo agreements, which are now 30 years old, be implemented. We've, on a daily basis, called for a 2-state solution. But as the UN stated, what are you doing to achieve that, apart from calling for it? Since Oslo, the number of settlers in the occupied territories has multiplied by 3, and the geographical area for a possible Palestinian state has been cut to a series of non-connected areas. The solution seems far away and it looks difficult to implement, but we don't have any alternative. If there aren't 2 states, there'll just be 1. And how would people live in this single state? How would people live together? What would the conditions for life be? We have one solution, so we need to mobilize our political energy, of which we have a great deal in Europe, to build it. Normalization of relations with Arab countries is not enough. And with this attack, it's possible that Hamas wanted to provoke an Israeli attack, which would make it impossible to have normal relations between Israel and Saudi Arabia. That may well have been one of its strategic objectives. It wasn't simply a crazy attack. It's a strategy to prevent moves towards peace. We've been working with our Special Envoy for the Middle East, Sven Kuhlmann. We've been working with Jordan, Egypt, the Arab League, Saudi Arabia to relaunch a process that can lead us to this 2-state solution. We need to recalibrate and increase our efforts in the United Nations. There are 60 countries all of them in favour of this solution. So today we should commit ourselves to this, and this would be the best way of honouring the dead on both sides. We should commit ourselves to building peace, which requires a political framework that has already been agreed. The UN resolutions necessary are already in place. All it needs is a political boost, which Europe can make a contribution to. In the Security Council today, we'll be debating a resolution presented yesterday by Brazil, which will be voted on today. And what we vote on in the Security Council and the way in which we communicate on the conflict is going to determine Europe's role in the world for many years to come. This morning I heard the mosque of Al-Azhar in Egypt, and there's a great deal of concern now, because what they said shows that we're moving towards a conflict between the Muslim and Christian worlds, and we can't have that, because security on our streets depends on us preventing that. Geopolitics depends on us preventing that conflict. We've made massive efforts to preventing the conflict moving further, to being extended towards Lebanon. I've spoken to many ministers during recent days. In Oman, we achieved a joint communication between the countries of the Gulf and the countries of the European Union. And I think it's that communication that should guide our action. Humanity and a political commitment to moving out of this solution and building a lasting peace. That's what we should be doing. Thank you.
Representative, I give the floor now to the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen.
Madam President, dear Roberta, High Representative Josep, Minister Alvarez, Hamas terror has plunged Israel and Palestine into a new spiral of violence. Last night, a senseless tragedy has shocked us all. A hospital in Gaza, sheltering hundreds of wounded people, was turned into a hell of fire. The scenes from Al-Ali Hospital are horrifying and distressing. There is no excuse for hitting a hospital full of civilians. All facts need to be established, and those responsible must be held accountable. In this tragic hour, we must all redouble our efforts to protect civilians from the fury of this war. And let me express my condolences to the families of the victims of the terrorist attacks in Brussels and Arras. Tragically, we see that terror is resurfacing again. It is also terror that brings us here to this debate, the heinous terror attacks of Hamas on Israel. What we have seen in the kibbutz Kfar Aza is pure evil. The blood witness of horror, the burned houses, the abandoned children's toys that no child would touch ever again. Hamas terrorists slaughtered over 1,400 men, women, children, and babies in one day for one single reason: because they were Jews, just living in the state of Israel, with the explicit goal to eradicate Jewish life. Israel has the right to self-defense in line with international law. Hamas are terrorists, and the Palestinian people are also suffering from that terror, and we have to support them. And there is no contradiction in standing in solidarity with Israel and acting on the humanitarian needs of the Palestinian people. I have visited Israel many times in my life, but this time I saw a nation that is shocked to the core. I was struck to hear the same request from all the people I spoke to, from President Herzog, Prime Minister Netanyahu, all forces in the unity government, from families of the abducted, they all asked for solidarity and clear words. And this is the least we can do for the people of Israel. This horror calls for a united response from us as human beings, as defenders of a free world, as Europeans where hate, terror, and racism have no place. Europe stands with Israel in this dark moment. This is the essential starting point, and I believe it was important to pass this message of solidarity in person in Israel just days after the attack. Only if we acknowledge Israel's pain and its right to defend itself will we have the credibility to say that Israel should react as a democracy in line with international humanitarian law. And that is crucial to protect civilian lives, even and especially in the middle of a war. We first have to listen if we want to be listened to. And indeed, during my visit, I discussed Israel's efforts to protect civilian lives. There can be no hesitation on our side. Europe will always be on the side of humanity and of human rights. Allow me to update you on our work to address this dramatic situation and the broader crisis that Hamas has unleashed. Let me begin with the humanitarian situation, which is getting worse by the hour. Humanitarian aid must urgently reach Palestinians. This is why we have decided to immediately triple our humanitarian aid to civilians in Gaza, and we have launched an EU humanitarian air bridge to Egypt to bring life-saving supplies to humanitarian organizations on the ground in Gaza. The first 2 flights are taking place already this week, carrying humanitarian cargo from UNICEF. We have deployed our staff and we are working with UN agencies to ensure that this aid can reach those in need. The European Union has always been the largest international donor to Palestine, and this will not change. But as the situation on the ground evolves, it is also essential that we urgently and carefully review our financial assistance for Palestine. EU funding has never gone to Hamas or any terrorist entity, and it never will. What Hamas has done has nothing to do with the legitimate aspirations of the Palestinian people, so it was good to hear President Abbas' clear words that came out on Sunday evening. My second point is about the regional situation. Hamas' actions have major geopolitical implications. We know that they risk affecting the historic rapprochement between Israel and the Arab countries. But there is nothing inevitable in this. Instability can be contained. Dialogue between Israel and its neighbors can and must continue. So this time of war must also be a time of unrelenting diplomacy, a moment to engage even more closely with Israel and with other countries in the region. I have been recently talking to several Arab leaders, including the King of Jordan, the President of the UAE, as well as the President of Egypt. All were very clear about the importance of our EU funding, and the European Union, with its massive funding, we are the largest donor, has not only leverage, but also has a stake in it. And thirdly, we are seeing a rise in anti-Semitic incidents, including here in Europe. Synagogues have been vandalized. Hate speech and fake news are spreading at worrying speed. And this is something that we simply cannot accept. It is our shared responsibility to make sure that our dark past does not return. We have to protect Jewish life in Europe. In these years, we have put the fight against anti-Semitism and all hate crimes at the heart of our action. Thanks to our collective work on the Digital Services Act, we now have laws to take down illegal content online and contain the spread of disinformation. And we are now using them for the first time ever. We have already launched an investigation in relation to X, formerly known as Twitter. They must comply with the obligation to counter the spread of terrorist propaganda and hate speech. Because in Europe, there is no place and zero tolerance for hate, whether online or in our streets. We have also stepped up our work to ensure the physical security of Jewish communities. We have already increased EU funding for the protection of places of worship, such as synagogues. And at the beginning of the mandate, we proposed to add hate crimes and hate speech to the list of EU crimes that must be sanctioned all across our union. Our proposal is still blocked by some member states, but it cannot wait any longer. It is time now for member states to act and to move on. Europe's history is a history of diversity. Jewish values have shaped our common European values. Among others, Jewish culture has for centuries enriched our common European culture. And this must continue to be the case. European Jews must be free to wear kippah or Star of David in our streets, and to light our cities with the candles of Hanukkah in their windows. And every European must be free from fear. We must make good on Europe's promise to be united in diversity, to be a safe place for all Europeans. Honourable members, this is the moment for all of us to come together, to join forces against terror in all its forms, and to do what is right. I will go now back to Brussels to join a commemoration ceremony for the victims of the recent terror attack in Brussels. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. And now we go to the speakers of the political groups, starting with the EPP Group, President Manfred Weber.
President, Parliament, Commission, High Representative, dear Minister, dear colleagues. Why do we have today's debate? On October the 7th, Israel was attacked. Israel was attacked in Be'eri kibbutz, 120 children, women, men killed, parents using their bodies to protect their children. Israel was attacked during a festival to celebrate peace, 250 young people killed. Israel was attacked in shops and streets, at home, more than 2,000 people victims, women being raped and paraded as trophies, including people with European passports in their pockets, as 20% of Israelis do. Israel was attacked, but also Europe was attacked. The European way of life was attacked. Israel was, after the Holocaust, the promise that Jewish people can live in safety and in peace. And now Holocaust survivors were dragged out of their home being abducted and held hostage. The images of media broadcasted since Saturday are the ones that make us put our hands over our children's eyes. This is the evil face of terrorism. The brutality of Hamas recalls the worst atrocities of ISIS. Hamas terrorists attacked a party in Israel as ISIS attacked Bataclan in Paris. We see in Israel what we saw in Paris, reasonful, inhuman attacks against freedom. And terrorists spread like a virus. In France, now a teacher killed. In Belgium, 2 Swedish citizens killed. The virus of terrorism is also back in Europe. And it's a moment where we are tested. And I tell you, these terrorists made the same fatal mistake like all terrorists do. They underestimate the power of democracy and the will to defend freedom. Colleagues, these are days of mourn for the victims and hope for those still in the hand of Hamas. But these must also be days of firm determination. We must be crystal clear. We stand with Israel, no hesitation, no excuses, no buts. In such a critical moment, in such a critical situation, Europe has to stand together. And that's why I thank Ursula von der Leyen for her trip of last Friday to Israel. I have to be honest, I was a little bit surprised that it took 10 days for the European Council to have an online meeting. 10 days in such a moment. And dear High Representative, dear Joseph, I respect you personally very much, you know this. But in a moment when our neighbourhood is on fire and we know about the geopolitical importance of the region, Blinken is travelling to Egypt and Israel, and our High Representative is travelling to China in such a moment. And I was told that in the last 4 years you never went to Israel to do talks there and try to establish a peace process in a solid way. So that's why it's in a way a lesson learned that we have to come together and define a common European approach. For us as EPP, some points are key. First, we are on the side of Israel. Second, we are fighting against Hamas, against terrorism, not against the Palestinian people. Third, we are ready to support with humanitarian aid and even with additional money, as Ursula von der Leyen proposed it. We care about every victim in this tragic conflict. Fourth, not any cent of EU money must end up in the pockets of Hamas or any other terrorist group. Fifth, whoever supports the terror of Hamas and Hezbollah is Europe's enemy. We have to rethink also our policy towards Iran. Sixth, it is unbelievable what happened on social media during the last days. Hamas propaganda glorifying terror without limits. The killer of Brussels was online explaining why he was killing innocent people. Our youth listening online to these kind of things. This must stop. This must stop immediately. Zuckerberg and Musk must finally stop being the megaphone of hate messages. And the seventh point, we Europe, we must activate now our tightest screening mechanisms to make sure that no terrorists enters Europe through migrant routes. Dear colleagues, it's a moment where we are tested. We have to be together. I thank also Roberta Metsola for her trip to Israel. Our position is crystal clear. We stand by Israel's promise for freedom, peace and democracy.
Thank you, Mr. Weber. Now, for the S&D Group, I invite the President Irache Garcia Perez to take the floor.
La barbarie de Hamas.
The barbarity of Hamas deeply moved us. No cause can justify the murder of innocent people. We feel the immense pain of the Israeli people and the terrible suffering expressed by the families of the hostage who are here in the hemicycle today. Sira, Jonathan, Noah, we will not rest until your families return home. And we have no better way of helping Israel than saying that we will not rest in our search for peace. And we'll also have to look into the massacre in the hospital yesterday in Gaza with over 500 Palestinians, men, women and children murdered. Mrs. von der Leyen, as well as showing our union's solidarity with the Israeli people, which of course we have to do, and you did that, we should remind Mr. Netanyahu that crimes cannot be fought with other crimes. The worst thing was the language of his defense minister when he called the inhabitants of Gaza human animals. Now, I would say to Mr. Netanyahu that his ultimatum for 1 million Gazans to leave their homes in just a few hours was totally unacceptable. Did you, Mrs. von der Leyen, remind him that there'll only be a long-term peace when the inhabitants of Gaza and the Palestinians have hope? Ladies and gentlemen, millions of people are in danger, and the European Union cannot continue to commit errors such as suspending all aid to Palestinians as proposed by Commissioner Várhelyi. We have an obligation to call for international mediation, to call for a ceasefire, free the Israeli hostages, and also open up a humanitarian corridor to Egypt. It's not time for ideological battles or to apply double standards. Israel has the full right to fight Hamas and to respond to the terrible attack of the 7th of October, but it has an obligation to respect international law. And the murder of civilians in Gaza, cutting water, food, medicines, and also the ultimatum which displaced the population are violations of international humanitarian law. Ladies and gentlemen, following the centuries-long persecution of the Jewish people and the murder of 6 million Jews by Nazi cruelty, the Jewish people achieved their dream, their own state. The Palestinian people also have a right to achieve their dream, the right to their own state, a Palestinian state that can live in peace with the State of Israel, because peace is always possible. And if peace were possible after millennia of war in Europe, it can and must be possible in the Middle East too. And the responsibility of the European Union as a power that exports peace is to act together to contribute to a peaceful and fair solution. Although that may seem impossible now, we need to build a free Middle East without hate, a Middle East where walls are taken down and where weapons fall silent. We need schools, hospitals, housing, all these things, a Middle East that we can call home for its citizens. It's been 30 years since the Oslo agreements were signed, and at this time it's important to recall that the only path to peace was shown us by Yitzhak Rabin, a Labour Prime Minister. He sacrificed his life for peace, and today his words need to guide us, moving forward in the peace, with the peace process as if there were no terrorism, and fight terrorism as if there were no conversations on peace. Thank you.
Now give the floor to Stéphane Séjourné, President of the Renew Group.
Dear colleagues, President, the suffering in the world has settled our continent once again. The absolute barbarity of the atrocities by Hamas against Israeli civilians have shocked us. Terrorism has hit us once again, and we stand with the Israeli people just as they have stood with us through terrorism. I want to say as firmly as possible on behalf of my group, there is no doubt whatsoever about the qualification of the crimes and designation of Hamas as a terrorist organization where our Jewish families are threatened in our homes. And it is our moral duty to say, and we need, if there is ambiguity, then there will be responsibility for that. as you have said, it is important to look at how this affects our society. There is a temptation at the extremes. Our responsibility as Europeans is to have clear words which are in line with our values and our responsibilities. The resolution that we're going to vote on has to be in line with the gravity of these challenges. And we would say that this has to be the basis for the action being carried out by the EU. First of all, condemnation and a call for the unconditional release of the hostages. And we would also pay tribute to those who are here today on behalf of these people. And we also need to guarantee safety in line with international human rights. That is the topic of this debate, which was approved in the Conference of Presidents by all of the groups. And then thirdly, the need to ensure the protection of Palestinian civilians in the Gaza Strip. We are shocked by the bombardment of a hospital. There is not one village or city which is more valuable than others, and we call for the establishment of a humanitarian corridor and the tripling of aid to refugees. And fourthly, the EU needs to support every effort that will lead to a two-state solution with two democratic states living in peace. That has to be our political aim. Around this consensus, we have to define our actions. And the President of the Council, the President of the Commission, the High Representative, your words commit Europe, and this resolution and the meeting which took place yesterday between the heads of the member states. I wanted to say that random comments made over the past few weeks need to come to an end. Israelis and Palestinians need a united, clear Europe, which brings together all Europeans on a clear position. We succeeded for Ukraine, and we should succeed for all of the international crises that we face. And the resolution sets out the demands of Europe, because geopolitics is not a playground. It shouldn't be partisan. It is the protection of our populations, of our values, and if we want to be a positive player in the crisis, then we need to be at the height of that challenge.
I now give the floor to the co-president of the Green Group, Philip Lamberts.
Nothing, absolutely nothing, can justify the barbaric acts committed by Hamas. Deliberately killing civilians, taking children, women and men hostage. What this terrorist organization committed are crimes against humanity, in line with its chief goal, the obliteration of Israel. We condemn them in the strongest possible terms, and I stand here in the name of the Green CFA in full solidarity with the victims and their loved ones. As well put by US author Frank Herbert, atrocity has no excuses, no mitigating argument. Atrocity never balances or rectifies the past. Atrocity merely arms the future for more atrocity. Yes, Israel has the right and duty to defend its citizens in full compliance with international humanitarian law. This means that the response to crime cannot be more crime, and that atrocities suffered do not provide a permission for revenge. Israel's legitimate fight against Hamas is turning into the collective punishment of 2 million Gazawis. Half of them are children. Trapped under an illegal siege, they are either forced into an impossible relocation or risk being killed by Sahal's attacks, as more than 3,000 were already. No less than Israeli victims, Palestinian victims, deserve our full solidarity. Dear colleagues, the world is staring into the abyss. The European Union must stand united in calling for an immediate ceasefire so as to allow the creation of humanitarian corridors and the safe return and unconditional return of hostages. We must be unanimous in our efforts to demand the respect of international humanitarian law by all actors. We must collectively step up our efforts to relaunch a political process that will make a two-state solution viable. There's no other choice. If we want Israelis to live in security, if we want Palestinians to live in dignity, and if we are serious about ensuring their coexistence. For there will be no peace until terrorist organizations such as Hamas are neutralized. There will be no peace as long as Palestinian territories are illegally occupied and Palestinians' rights denied and their resources confiscated. There will be no peace until democratic institutions are firmly restored and anchored. There will be no peace until Palestinians and Israelis are both free to live, speak, move, work, love as they wish in safety, regardless of their origins and beliefs. Chers collègues, pour conclure,
Colleagues, to conclude, as an Israeli author said, the divisions in the Middle East are not between the Jews and the Arabs, they're between the moderates and the extremists, between the pragmatists and the fanatics. We need to unite our forces in defense of life and against our common enemy. This seems difficult at the moment. Thank you.
And I now give the floor to representative of the ECR Group, Bert-Jan Rausen.
Mevrouw de voorzitter.
President, Commissioner, Minister, colleagues, the horrific actions of Hamas have shocked us deeply. They forced us once again to look at the harsh truth. Israel faces a terrorist organization which respects no one and nothing. What we need to do is to be crystal clear. We need to provide unconditional support to Israel in her fight against Hamas. But we must also look to ourselves. Has the EU done enough to put an end to terrorism? And the answer to that question is no. We transferred millions to the Palestinian Authority, while this authority facilitates terrorism by paying handsome salaries to family members of terrorists who have been killed, for instance. And what are we to make of water pipes paid for by EU funds, which are then used to make bombs? This is why I appeal to you, support our amendment to ensure that any of the subsidies which are paid are tied to very clear conditions. Of course, help is needed, but Hamas aggression cannot happen without consequences.
I give the floor to Jordan Bardella for the ID Group.
Merci, Madame la Présidente du Parlement.
Thank you, Madam President, President of the European Commission. On the 7th of October, Israel was struck at its heart and suffered the most murderous attack ever on the state. 199 hostages in Gaza. This shocking attack has horrified our societies, and it shows that we must not drop our guard before the threat of terrorism and Islamism. We must not yield to 21st century totalitarianism. And yet Hamas's ideology is already present in our societies. This is not so much a clash of civilizations as a barbaric attack on civilization. Israel will demonstrate to the world its ability to react and its reaction must be targeted, must respect international law. There will never be impunity for such barbaric action.
Co-President of Left Group, Man Aubrey.
Chers collègues, dear colleagues, yesterday evening, Gaza saw the unthinkable. A hospital was struck and destroyed. Behind its walls, there were children and health workers. It was a hospital where life is to be protected. Many lost their lives. It's a carnage. 1/3 of the people who have been killed are children. We have to call things by their name. These are war crimes. And the Palestinians are trapped under Israeli bombs. Given this humanitarian crisis, every single minute counts. An unending spiral of violence has started since the barbaric actions by Hamas. In this context, Madam van der Leyen, and I regret that you didn't wait for the meeting of the presidents of the group. You have one responsibility, which is to fly the flame of peace and say that every life counts, but you did not do that. Worse, when you went to Israel, you usurped the European voice and gave support to the acts. The legitimate defence is not a right to attack. You cannot have a collective punishment of citizens for crimes they have not committed. They are not cannon fodder. And Madam van der Leyen, how did you give unconditional support to Netanyahu without saying one thing about a ceasefire? Of course, we stand with the Israeli people who have been attacked by Hamas. On the 7th of October, Hamas sowed terror and killed over 1,000 innocent people and took 199 hostages. But we need to condemn these atrocities. Every Israeli citizen deserves our compassion and support when faced by these barbaric actions. But Mrs. van der Leyen, we can only fight that appropriately. What about the bombardments of Gaza? Where is humanity when you're cutting off water and refusing health care? And when people are called human animals, and when 1 million of them are told to flee without knowing where they're going to go. For decades, the oppression of the Palestinian people, its humiliation and its colonization have been covered by a complicit silence by Western countries. Gaza was already an open prison. Now it is hell on earth. And if nothing is done, soon it will be a cemetery. Mrs. van der Leyen, when the situation is so difficult, you need to confirm today, as the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres did this morning, the only valid objective is a ceasefire. So we call for the immediate release of the hostages and the opening of humanitarian corridors, and certainly not the ending of aid to Palestinians, as your commissioners propose. Everything needs to be done to ensure that there is a lasting peace through a two-state solution, which is defended by our Parliament. Peace, Madam van der Leyen, calls for recognition and coexistence. History is watching. If we fall in the trap of eye for an eye, everyone will end up blind. Thank you.
To Fabio Massimo Castaldo for 1 minute.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you, President. Colleagues, the terrible images of the barbaric terrorist attack committed by Hamas on innocent people will remain before our eyes forever. Israel has the clear right to defend itself, but it also has a clear duty as a democratic state to fully respect international law. In order to defeat Hamas terrorists, it's not necessary to carpet bomb the Gaza Strip to enable civilians to be evacuated. It's not enough to send down flyers from planes. You can't bomb the entire Palestinian people in order to do away with Hamas. They are the hostages of Hamas, and as always, it's innocent people who are paying the price for this war. Over a third of those killed in Gaza are children, innocent children, like the innocent children of Israel, who were murdered by Hamas. These are innocent children, not hardened terrorists who should be the targets of any response. Europe can't stand by and watch while this unprecedented humanitarian disaster unfolds. We need to ensure that humanitarian aid can enter Gaza. We need to ensure that civilians are looked after. Gaza cannot become a worse hell on earth than it has been until today. Thank you.
Lopez Isturiz White, Tono, 2 minutes.
Thank you very much, dear President of the Commission, for your leadership. Once again, like during the COVID, like during the war on Ukraine, again you have spoken for all of us. Not like others, that they are here only for a political gain or for sectarism. You are representing the true heart of this European Union. Hoy tenemos ante nosotros una responsabilidad.
Well, today we have a historic responsibility. Now, this is what's going to happen tomorrow. Tomorrow, the Parliament will have to decide whether or not it condemns terrorism. We're going to hear a lot of speeches today, all different points of view, whatever. Tomorrow, however, when we vote, we will see who stands against terrorism and who doesn't. That is the single criterion, quite apart from ideologies. Fighting terrorism, it requires no half measures. Unfortunately, we learned that in Spain. We have all these sweet-sounding speeches, but we're talking about people who've murdered people, they've raped women, they've killed innocent people. We shouldn't be hearing what we hear in the streets, in the corridors of the European Parliament. Now, almost on the anniversary of the Yom Kippur War, Israel has once again been attacked in a cowardly and brutal manner. There are people who refuse to condemn what happened, and that's incredible to see. But not only do they do that, they accuse and insult those of us who condemn terrorism. That's nothing new for those of us from Spain. We've already seen it. We've lived through it. But we will defeat terrorism. We will defeat it. Because defeating terrorism is in line with the principles of the European Union. We're seeing these principles denied in the streets of Europe, and we know who's behind this conflict. Hamas, Hezbollah, Iran's proxies, which is an extremist regime which can't accept the normalization of relations between Arab states and Israel. It's their manipulation which is destabilizing our European democracies. We can't allow that to happen, and we'll make it clear in tomorrow's resolution. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Tonino Piccola.
Thank you, Mr. President. First of all, I would like to explicitly condemn the brutal attacks of Hamas on Israel 11 days ago. That was the deadliest day for them since. Sincere condolences to the families of the victims and full support for all efforts to release the hostages. Terror must be stopped, but this debate wouldn't be complete without a broader context. An important distinction between Hamas and other terrorist groups from Palestinians deprived of most essential resources and used as human shields in this brutal conflict, as even hospitals are being attacked. International law must be applied, and the International Criminal Court should be in charge. Most urgently, we have to do our best to ensure that humanitarian corridors are functional and to support the work of UN, UNRWA and all humanitarian workers there. It's essential, of course, that the European Union start speaking with a unified voice, thus beginning to live up to its geopolitical ambitions. Thank you.
Thank you. Madame Woutmans, the floor is yours.
Dank u wel, meneer de voorzitter.
Thank you very much, President. Colleagues. Mr. Borrell, what is happening in Israel is horrific. Hundreds of dead in kibbutzes, and what happened yesterday is an attack on a hospital where healthcare workers, doctors, children are, and the death of Dominique Bernard in hate, and then the death of two football supporters from Sweden in my own city, Brussels. Full support for Israel and stop Israel. That's what, and sanctions, Qatar and Iran. When are we going to have sanctions against the horrific regime in Iran, and not just the symbolic 100 or so people on the list? And I was going to address Mrs. van der Leyen, but she is not here. Hamas is not the Palestinian people. People live in the West Bank and Gaza, but they don't necessarily support Hamas. We need a new peace process, and we need to make sure that we have democratic states, and the supporters of this approach are in the majority, and that is what we need to do. That is true geopolitical union. Colleagues, every tragedy is also an opportunity to build peace and fight against hate, and you have our support.
Merci. Mr. Jordi Solé.
Is it too much to ask that barbarism and atrocities be unequivocally condemned, even when someone may feel close to the cause in whose name they are supposedly committed? If we don't first and foremost have a human response to victims of terror, we are lost. The attacks by Hamas and the holding of hostages are acts of terrorism, and it saddens me that there are some still reluctant to condemn them. These atrocities hurt the Palestinian cause, which is a legitimate cause that does not deserve to be put into the hands of fanatics. We are still terrified by yesterday's massacre in the Gaza hospital. Such criminal acts have to be investigated and perpetrators be held accountable. The indiscriminate killings of innocent civilians and the immense suffering inflicted to civilian population need to be condemned and stopped. Demanding respect for international humanitarian law does not weaken our condemnation to terror. It rather strengthens our commitment to a rules-based world, even in a world full of hatred. We are facing an extremely difficult situation. No diplomatic effort has to be spared in order to avoid an even bigger humanitarian crisis and to prevent a regional spillover of the conflict. Humanitarian corridors need to be put in place now. Hostages need to be released. It is urgent to de-escalate in the perspective of quickly achieving a ceasefire. These are days of rage and sorrow. But sooner rather than later, those who reject violence and want peace will need to be rewarded. There is a conflict pending resolution for decades, and the only way out is through international law and a just peace. Terrorism is also fought by genuinely and tirelessly working for peace. Now, with the bombs falling, this may seem like wishful thinking, but it is not. It is the truth that everyone knows, but too few dare to say these days.
Our next speaker is Mr. Charlie Weymouth.
Thank you, Mr. President. We were all appalled by the images of butchered babies and the burning of people by Hamas. Sorry, not all of us, unfortunately. Not the celebratory crowds on the streets of Europe. Not Manu Pineda of the left who fraternized with Hamas's leader Ismail Haniyeh. Instead of being thrown out of the left group, they nominated him to the head of the EU Parliament delegation for Palestine. And when you hear Madame Aubry ignoring evidence that says that it was the Palestinian Islamic Jihad that fired that rocket that hit the hospital, you understand why, don't you? And my question to the Swedish Social Democrats, why are you keeping your MP Jamal El-Hajj in your party? He protested under the banner of Hamas, worked with the Hamas-linked Al-Aqsa Foundation, and attended a conference with a Hamas leader. He wasn't kicked out. Mr. President, if they, on the left, don't want to be associated with anti-Semitism, terrorism, and cynical electoral politics, they need to stand unequivocally with Israel against Hamas. Thank you.
Yes, please. Mr. Madison Yag, the floor is yours.
Thanks so much, dear President, dear Minister, dear Mr. Borrell. First of all, I think there is no possible way to justify this kind of barbaric terrorist attacks against the state of Israel. And anyone who tries to justify that are not better at all than those terrorists. It is not possible to justify. The second question, also from my side, is, in the last 4 years, Mr. Borrell has been in several states in a neighborhood in the Middle East, but you have been not at once in Israel, while at least 20% of the Jewish people in Israel has also the EU passport. Why is it like that? The third question was for Mrs. von der Leyen, but of course I understand that she has no time to stay here to listen to debates and also the political members from the different countries, but Hamas has officially called for jihad all over the world and in Europe. And the result was also on Monday evening, 2 days ago, when one illegal terrorist migrant killed 2 Swedish football fans. And this person was for years illegal in Europe. The Belgian police knew that he is in Belgium. Now is the question, how many hundreds or thousands illegal persons we have in Europe who has no right to stay here, who has no asylum, no legal base, but they're still staying here, traveling around Europe, and they are a potential threat to our security and safety. What is the number? Do you know the number at least? We have to know, and if you don't know, you haven't done your work. And just for the last point, this war is a piece of the huge puzzle where the cruel side is Iran, Hamas, Russia and China, and we have to fight with that, and we have to understand what is the real enemy. Thank you.
Thank you, dear colleagues. I must look now to the speaking time. Please accept it, because we have 35 speakers in this very important debate, and it's a question of fairness of the individual speakers to accept their own speaking time. Our next speaker is Mr. Manu Pineda.
Sí, Presidente, por favor, antes de...
President, but I do want to make a point of order before my time starts. I don't know why we've been told that we can wear cultural and religious symbols, and I was not allowed to come out with the Palestinian scarf. It's not a flag. I was asked not to wear the Palestinian headscarf, though. I don't think there's any rule that prevents that, just as a point of order. Now, moving on to my speech. Thank you, President. Well, the first thing I'd say is that Mrs. von der Leyen should have had the decency to remain till the end of this debate, because there are things that we want to say to her. But I'm not surprised that she hasn't stayed, because she doesn't have that decency. The statement that Mr. Borrell made in Amman. He was talking about something revolutionary, international law. I think it's revolutionary to call for something which should have been a sine qua non. But Mrs. von der Leyen and Mrs. Metsola went to Tel Aviv unconditionally supporting a genocidal regime, a regime that has turned the Gaza Strip into something which is very similar to the Warsaw Ghetto. They have produced a siege in which people are being allowed to die without water, light, fuel, medicines and food. And since yesterday, things have got even worse. People are dying under Israeli bombs. It's now become an extermination camp, I'd say. And it is inconceivable. The Speaker has been interrupted by the President.
Muchas gracias, Presidente.
So, meine Damen und Herren, zwei Dinge.
Ladies and gentlemen, 2 points. I have Article 10 of our Rules of Procedure and apply that, which is the basis for a solid debate. And secondly, Roberta Metsola, his visit was in line with the agreement made by the Conference of the Presidents. And the next speaker, Mr. Nicolas Bay. The jihadists have massacred young people, killing families, killing children, and some people in France and even here in the hemicycle refuse to say that Hamas is a terrorist group. We have to understand them as sympathizers of Hamas are their supporters. These are people who are not assimilated and will not be assimilated and are promoting Hamas in Europe. And Mrs. von der Leyen is saying that we will triple the aid, but everyone knows that at least part of this ends up in the pockets of Hamas. And all of the attacks with guns, with vehicles in Brussels, in Paris, in Stockholm, the expression of constant jihad. And sometimes dressed up. There are pretexts for this, but there is a single ideology, attack everything that is not Islam. And so we have no choice. We have to lead and win the war. We have to control what is said in mosques and stop sending millions to those who want to destroy our civilizations and our people. Thank you. Michael Gahler, you have the floor.
Mr. President, colleagues, the attack by the Hamas terrorist organization was the biggest on Jewish citizens since the Holocaust. I hope that it will be possible to free the hostages and that Qatar can be helpful. I hope that it will be possible to destroy the Hamas structures in Gaza. Hamas is also a repressive, corrupt regime in Gaza. I hope that the Palestinian Authority will be able to assume the role of government in Gaza, where the civilians are innocent. The responsibility for the attacks is with Hamas, not with Gaza citizens. We should provide humanitarian aid. Since 1999, this is the fourth time this has happened in Gaza. We need a peace process. We need the EU, USA to work together to bring Israel and the Palestinians, Egypt and Jordan to the table. The terrorists must not succeed. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Now, Vice President Katharina Barley. Colleagues, if we listen to some of the things that are being said here, we could think that this might be just a spiral in the Middle East. But today is a break. This was the most lethal attack since the Holocaust. And it wasn't an attack on the Israeli state, but it was an attack on children, young people at a musical festival at the only place where Jewish people could feel safe. And Hamas is responsible for that. Apparently, planned this for years, but at the same time, Hamas is using its own people as a human shield. They're using water pipes that are supposed to be used to provide water for people as bombs. We see that in their videos, and that is not a fight for peace. It is a terror organization that is killing civilians. And I think we need to be careful when we talk about disinformation. And Israel has the right to defend itself, and that has to be in line with international humanitarian law. We need to provide aid, and we need to make sure that Egypt opens the border at Rafah because there are vehicles there. So we're calling for the opening of that border post. Thank you very much. And now, Vice President Nicola Bear.
The images of the massacre, the displays of people murdered who were only murdered because they were Jews or visiting Israel, these images make clear the following quite clearly. It is obvious that the aim of these terror organizations is the destruction of the State of Israel and genocide against Jews. Madame Aubry, anyone who belittles or justifies terror against Israel, against Jews, anyone who practices anti-Semitism or calls for more terror, anyone who does so increases the anti-Semitism and terror also in our societies. We have to stop the support for Hamas. We have to make sure that Europe is not a home for these murderers, and we have to stop this hate and violence. In order to have a peaceful future, we stand alongside Israel.
Reinhard Bütikofer.
Now let me give the floor to Reinhard Bütikofer.
Herr Präsident, liebe Kolleginnen.
President, colleagues, since the end of the Shoah, which is always linked to the name of my country, there have not been more people killed on a single day of Jewish faith than the 7th of October with the barbaric attack by Hamas. In their will to destroy, these terrorists are following on from what the Nazis did, and Israel deserves our full support. Israel is defending itself. It needs to defend itself, and Europe needs to at least understand that. There are many people who are moved by the suffering of Palestinians. Yes, we do need a respecting of international human rights law. We do need humanitarian corridors, but let's not forget we need the step which will ensure that there's no escalation, the unconditional release of the hostages being held by Hamas. And we should be giving a warning to Hezbollah and Iran. The world community will not forget if you keep pouring oil on the fire. The way to peace is long, but it is possible. Thank you very much. And now, Herman Tertsch, you have the floor.
Buenos días. Buenos días. Gracias.
Good morning. Thank you, President, Minister, High Representative. We have seen the worst killing of Jews since the Holocaust, and this has triggered a war, and some people are now complaining about the effects of that war, and they're blaming the Jews. And they also lie once again here in this chamber. They accuse Israel of things that others have done, which is the case when it comes to the bombing of the hospital, for example. What's happened in Gaza? Well, there's not a single Jew there. There's no settlement. There's no Jewish or Israeli soldiers there. They haven't been there for 20 years. It's the Palestinians who are in charge there. Billions have been sent there from Europe and the United States to build it up. They could have done something good. They've got a border with Egypt, with their Muslim friends. But all they've done is build a cesspit of hate, weapons and destruction. That's what they've done there. And we're seeing the same kind of thing happening here in Europe. Our borders are open and all those who support Hamas are coming in. And they're also supported by a government which is yours, Minister. Much of your government is supporting those who defend the killings of Jews. That's shameful for the Spanish government and it's shameful for Europe.
Ms. Anna Bonfrisco, the floor is yours.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you, President. High Representative Borrell, colleagues. We do not say enough that there are many Europeans who are among the victims and hostages taken as a result of the terrible Hamas attack. There are French citizens, Italians, Spanish and Germans, and I hope everything possible will be done to free those hostages and all hostages. High Representative, we hope the EU will do everything possible because Europeans and the Jewish people share the weight of history. During these days, together, we feel the pain inflicted by Islamic terrorism. But as well as suffering, we share our millennia-old contribution to humanity and civilization. Hamas wants to take us back to the Middle Ages, and the Palestinian people are the first victims of Hamas. The left can ignore that these Hamas attacks in Israel are the worst act that the Jewish people have suffered since the Holocaust. Can they look into the eyes of these children kidnapped by Hamas and not be ashamed of their political inconsistency? Thank you.
Ms. Martina Michels.
Herr Präsident, verehrte Kollegen.
Mr. President, colleagues, I confess this is a difficult speech to make. I am not speaking here on behalf of my group. I address you as a member of the German left, and I want to say that to me it is incomprehensible how anyone could try to diminish or justify Hamas's terrorist massacre. 60 Jewish and Arab Israelis, peace and human rights activists, see diminishing solidarity with victims of the Hamas attacks among part of the European left. And I say openly that they are absolutely right. Hamas terror has for years been an obstacle to Palestinian self-determination, long before the 7th of October. Israel has the right to defend itself. That is precisely why the EU must stop the escalation by the doomed Netanyahu government, especially a possible ground offensive. And the EU should call for respect for international humanitarian law. Anti-Semitism on the one hand and a refusal to talk to Palestinians on the other are again rearing their ugly heads in Europe. In this dark hour, we should shoulder our responsibility to guarantee Israel's right to existence and to promote peace in the Middle East for all sides. Thank you, Mr. Borrell, for your clear standpoint.
Dino.
The next next speaker is Dino Giarusso.
Onorevoli colleghi, la violenza terroristica.
Colleagues, Hamas's terrorist violence, their killings of civilians and the kidnap of young people who are innocent are a terrible thing. And so it's quite right to reiterate Israel's right to defend itself and live in peace. It's quite right to call out terrorism, but that's not enough. If we're honest, we have to say that the response to the Hamas terrorist attack, i.e. cutting water and supplies to the Palestinian people, are a major issue as well, because it prevents women, men and children who are not terrorists living in peace. These are just Palestinian human beings who should have the right to life and to live in peace, just as Israelis have. The people of Gaza need to be supported by European institutions, just as Israel does. Let's continue the work of Yitzhak Rabin. Let's call for two peoples and two states, but let's not hypocritically close our eyes to the violence that's being suffered by the innocent Gazan people, Palestinian people. We want to see Palestine free and we want to see Israel free. We shouldn't be looking at one side when it comes to violations of international law. I don't want to be ashamed of being European.
Unsere nächste Rednerin ist Frau Rasa Juknevičiene.
The next speaker is Rasa Juknevičiene.
Let me start by paying respect to brave leaders, two presidents, Roberta Metsola and Ursula von der Leyen. I am proud. Many in this chamber agree that we must be united and agree that we have to destroy Hamas as Al-Qaeda or ISIS. And we must be united in helping Israel to do it. The destruction of Hamas would free Israel and Palestinians from suffering. We hear slogans, "Free Palestine." I totally agree. We must free Palestine from Hamas. Justifying the crimes of Hamas is the same as justifying the Holocaust. Hamas is a tool of both Iran and Russia. These two regimes are the source of terrorism. If we don't help Ukraine win the war as soon as possible, more fires will be set burning. And the last but not least, in these terrible wars, we must all remain human.
Muito obrigado. Bom dia a todos.
Thank you very much and good morning, everybody. The next speaker is Pedro Marques.
Muito obrigado, Presidente, Alto Representante.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, High Representative, Minister, colleagues, guests. Every year, an Israeli family organized a peace festival on the Israel-Gaza border. Peace messages were exchanged across the border. This year, the festival was not organized. The family was murdered during the Hamas attack. We should do our utmost for peace to destroy the capacity of Hamas to conduct terrorism. We should not mix Hamas with the Palestinian people. We have a legal and moral responsibility to protect civilians and create a lasting peace between the two states. We should not continue with decades of fear and destruction.
Próximo orador, Bernard Guetta.
Thank you. And the next speaker is Mr. Guetta.
Je veux croire que nous serons unanimes.
I want to hope that we will vote for this resolution unanimously tomorrow. I hope that despite the fact that the text is too long, far too long, because we in fact only have three things to say. The first thing is that we are revulsed what happened, and that secondly, that the punishment for a crime cannot be a collective punishment, and the third thing is that such horror, even more yesterday evening, means that the Palestinians and Israelis need to start negotiations without delay to move towards a two-state solution. But colleagues, our duty is to impose the negotiations, to offer everyone safety and security guarantees, and to say that we are willing to review our trade agreements and aid if everyone refuses the compromises that will be necessary to end this 100-year war. In this parliament, there shouldn't be pro-Palestinians or pro-Israelis within the European Parliament. There should only be those supporting peace, a fair and lasting peace.
Muito obrigado. Tem agora a palavra Margaret Auken.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, Margaret Auken.
Tak til hr. Borrell også. Uanset hvem der står bag det der forfærdelige.
Well, yes, thank you, President. Thank you, High Representative. Well, it doesn't matter who was guilty of the bombing yesterday. It was a terrible event. But we shouldn't forget that Gaza is completely closed off at the moment. Nothing can get in. Children and adults have been bombarded in the Gaza Strip during recent days, and we have to react to that somehow. If we condemn that, but we also condemn Hamas for what it's been doing. I mean, we have to note that both sides have broken international law. Both sides should respect international law. So we have a massive challenge in Europe. We have to work towards a proper peace. But we have a responsibility here for the fact that nothing has happened over the last 30 years. We've spoken, we've said all sorts of things, but nothing has been done to move towards a solution, this two-state solution. Today, we have to send out a message. We need a full and comprehensive peace, and we have to act to ensure that we get the result that we so desire, because we don't help anyone if we don't find a solution. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Kanko.
Many innocent people, including children, will never see the sun rise again because they were Jewish. In 2023, they were slaughtered by Hamas that a colleague MP of Ms. Aubry called a movement of resistance on the French radio yesterday. Hamas is an Islamic terrorist organization that still holds Israeli and foreign hostages today, in addition to the population of Gaza itself, that it uses as a human shield against any Israeli military response. Worse than ISIS it is, and not so far from us. Again, another teacher was killed in France. Again, innocent citizens were shot in Brussels in the name of Allah. And yet, we as Europe keep making the same mistakes. Dear colleagues, radical Islam is progressing because we are not recognizing it as it is. I worry about the Jews. I worry about innocent Palestinians. I worry about Europe. I worry about our civilization and the loss of the feeling we all identify as safety. When in our European cities demonstrations shout death to Israel and death to Jews, then it's no longer a demonstration but death threats. Threats against Jews here and everywhere else, and against our Western civilization. The EU must fix its migration policy, control where its money goes, call radical Islam by its name, reject any infiltration, and also we must realize the people of Brussels do not need candles and commemoration, they need protection. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Colleagues, please stick to the allocated time. Next speaker, Sylvia Limach.
Werte Kollegen,
Colleagues, The cowardly massacre by Palestinian Hamas of Israeli civilians is an attack on our Western civilization, on values like tolerance and coexistence. It's an attack on our religious legacy. And yet here in the EU, all we hear is hollow words on the side of Israel. This is a horrific attack, and what you are missing is that it is the Arabic, Muslim, Palestinian, Lebanese, Syrian, and above all, Iranian mullah hate that wants to do away with the state of Israel. It is moral bankruptcy of left-wing anti-Semitism that we see in the EU, and I'm ashamed of it completely.
Muito obrigado. Chris McManus.
Thank you. Chris McManus, please.
Thank you, Chair. And firstly, I want to express my deepest sympathy and condolences to the family of Irish woman Kim Damptey and all families who've lost loved ones, whether they be Israeli or Palestinian. There is no justification for the killing of civilians by either Hamas or Israel. We must also condemn the forced displacement by Israel of Palestinians in clear breach of international humanitarian law, and the cutting off of water, fuel, food and medical supplies, and the destruction of civilian infrastructure throughout Gaza, which amounts to collective punishment in contravention of international humanitarian law. To achieve de-escalation, we need rigorous, impartial international leadership. So to President von der Leyen, your actions are a crucial reminder why unanimity must be retained on foreign security and defence policy, particularly for neutral countries like Ireland. Finally, following last night's horrific hospital attack, there is an urgent need for an immediate ceasefire and to formulate an effective roadmap providing for a proper negotiations process based on unconditional adherence to international law and the UN Charter. Only then can we begin to ensure a durable and just solution to the Palestinian question.
Muito obrigado. Próxima intervenção, Francesca Donato.
Thank you. Francesca Donato now, please.
Presidente.
Well, thank you, President. Israel is at war, and now we've seen a hospital in Gaza City struck by a rocket, and that's increased the numbers of victims. Accusations are flying between Hamas and Israel as to where this rocket came from, and we're going to have to investigate that properly so that we can prevent propaganda and speculation. But nevertheless, now we have to 100% stand by Israel. They're fighting with their men and women against the worst form of terrorism, because there can never be a Palestinian state nor peace between the two peoples as long as Hamas exists. We need to help the Palestinian population and Palestinian civilians, but we also need to protect Israelis, and we need to help the Israeli government in what they're doing. We need to check very carefully where we're sending European funds to ensure that tunnels aren't being built and terrorists aren't being funded. And we're also going to have to take clear measures to prevent other terrorists coming into Europe via migration channels. This is our responsibility. Thank you.
Muito obrigado. Tem a palavra agora Daniel Caspary.
Thank you. Daniel Caspary now, please.
Der menschenverachtende Terrorangriff der Hamas gegen die Menschen in Israel ist durch
the attack cannot be justified. Israel has a right to defend itself and to protect its population. I have no understanding for how some people are standing up and criticising Israel. Israel, despite the disadvantages that it brings, is trying to protect its citizens. If those people are criticizing Israel, they need to call on Hamas to release the hostages and not to be hiding munitions and the like in civilian bottles and keeping civilians. And what I thought was very good in Europe, we had the visits by our Commission and Parliament President, but these were quick, and I found it very strange, High Representatives, that you criticised the President for that visit. I think it is important that in these difficult times we are united and we keep any criticism to ourselves within our own homes. And Israel and all of the peace-loving people in the area need to be supported so that there is finally peace in the region. Thank you.
Muito obrigado. Próxima intervenção, Brando Benifei.
Brando Benifei now, please.
Grazie, Presidente, signor Alto Rappresentante.
Thank you, President. High Representative. We have condemned the massacre carried out by the terrorists of Hamas, and we have reiterated Israel's sacrosanct right to defend itself and neutralize the capacity of the terrorists. And we've also called for the immediate release of all the hostages. But we cannot see revenge being carried out. In Gaza, we're seeing a massive humanitarian disaster take place, and we can't be quiet, given that cutting water and electricity is a violation of international law, and it's also doing a favour to Hamas and Iran because they want to feed a spiral of unending destruction. What we need to do is isolate the terrorists and their supporters and fight the return of hateful forms of anti-Semitism and work towards an end of the bombardments. We need to see the restoration of a diplomatic process that can restore hope to the Israeli and Palestinian people after years of fear, terror and illegal occupation. The European Union needs to do its share of the work for peace.
Obrigado. Próxima intervenção, Munir Satouri.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Munir Satouri.
Avec fermeté.
I strongly attack the attacks by Hamas, and there are people on the left who aren't doing it, but they are those on the right who are not condemning the disproportionate response. My ancestors were fought against the Nazis, and they gave their life to liberate my country, France. They didn't collaborate with the Reich, so do not take this situation and make it a war of civilizations. That's exactly what the terrorists want. They want war to spread everywhere. We are built on an ideal of peace, and we need to bring that message to everyone. Europe is not doing it at the moment. It is not being heard. The world is deteriorating without us having any influence whatsoever.
Muito obrigado. Próxima intervenção, Alessandra Vondra.
Mr. Vondra, please.
Dámy a pánové.
Ladies and gentlemen, complexity and the insoluble nature of what's happening in the Middle East must not deprive us of the understanding of what is essential. What we saw last week is in fact black and white. It's a barbarian attack on our civilization, an attack by those who want death against those who love life. It's an attack on people with devilish goals who kill, abduct, rape women and use their own people as human shields. What is happening over there isn't about Palestinians. It's about Hamas. It's about terrorists. It's about those who deny Israel everything right up to the right of existence. And we have one task. We should stand firmly on the side of Israel.
Muito obrigado. Tem a palavra Philippe de Man.
Philip de Man now, please.
Dank u, voorzitter.
Thank you, President. Colleagues, you're shocked by the outbreak of hate in Israel, in France, in Brussels. But, colleagues, you're subsidizing hate. You're importing hate. The subsidies that you give from the EU budget, 1.2 billion. And in another year, 2.1 in development aid to Palestine. And why? Because you're importing hate, Chechen, Afghan, and Palestinians are being let into Europe. And why? Couldn't they go to their Islamic brothers in the oil states? And what about the attack on Zaventem? How many more people need to die before you finally open your eyes?
Muito obrigado. Próxima intervenção, Miroslav Radachowski.
Mr. Radachowski next, please.
Kolegovia, kolegyne.
Colleagues, there is no chosen people, or indeed a not chosen people. We are all chosen by God because we live on one earth. It will never be possible to destroy the Jewish nation, but nor will it ever be possible to destroy the long-suffering Palestinian nation. My question is this: why do we only want to give the Jewish people the right to live in their own country? Why not the Palestinians? Why do we have double standards when solving problems? All attacks on women, infrastructure are unjustifiable on either side. I agree with Mr. Borrell. I agree with Russia and China. The basis for a definitive resolution is the two-state solution, the creation of an independent Palestinian state. Thank you.
Muito obrigado. Próxima intervenção, Ioan Rares Bogdan.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Ioan Rares Bogdan.
Și ticăloșia grupării criminale.
It is quite clear to any European what Hamas is doing. We have to defend Europe with whatever we can. Europe is based on Judeo-Christian values. It is vital to stop terrorism. It must not take root. We should not get lost in political infighting. We have teachers killed in France, a terrorist attack in Brussels, attacks on London, Brussels, Paris, Madrid. We had the 11th of September in New York. I think it's quite clear what is happening. Israel is legitimate in defending its people. It is absolutely right to carry on what it has started. We should verify what is happening to the money we are giving to the Palestinians. It's quite clear that this money is not only being used for humanitarian purposes. We have to help populations in need. The microphone has been cut off.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Your time is over. Próxima intervenção, Carina Olsen.
Carina Olsen, please.
Tack, herr talman. Civila israeler har...
President, Israeli civilians were injured and killed, men, women and children, and we firmly condemn the Hamas attack against Israel, and Israel has the right to defend itself and to rescue the hostages, but Israel also has human rights obligations towards the civilian. The Palestinian civilian should not be punished. Yesterday evening we heard that hundreds died in an attack on a hospital in Gaza, and that is unacceptable. Or any attacks against civilian installations must be condemned. There needs to be access to food and to water and medicines, and the EU has said that it wants to triple aid. We welcome that as S&D. We need support for those who are fighting for peace and for humanity.
Mr. Urtasun now. Thank you, President. Let me unequivocally condemn the terrible acts carried out by Hamas, and I'd like to see the hostages fully and immediately freed. Secondly, we have to clearly state that the punishment that Israel is inflicting on the Gaza Strip is collective punishment, and it's a war crime. Cutting electricity, water and light to millions of people is illegal and should be condemned by the European Union. We have to call for speak out against that, and we have to also call for an investigation with regard to the bombing on the hospital yesterday. Now, I didn't understand why the President of the Commission and the President of this Parliament to Israel, who were they speaking on behalf of? Were they speaking on behalf of us? They weren't speaking on behalf of the millions of Europeans who want to see a fair and just solution for peace. We need a ceasefire urgently, and we need to renew peace talks, which can lead to the two-state solution, which we all know is the only viable solution to this conflict. Thank you.
Tem palavra Harald Wilinski.
Thank you. Mr. Wilinski now, please.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, the Greens and the left, those sympathizing with Hamas, and do you really think that this is the time to triple support? Because this money is going to Hamas, who have all these stockpiles of weapons, just as it is absurd that yesterday President Michel said that Europe would help in de-escalation. That is the same organization that's then getting their people sent from Brussels to Strasbourg, and they end up in eudebates. Over 8 years, it hasn't been possible to deal with the water situation. That is the European Union, and it is failing. It's failing in Ukraine, and now it's fraying, and it's in fact inflaming the conflict by providing these funds. Talk here about peace, and that is what you need to talk about, and don't talk about doing things that you're not able to do. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Colleague Kfar, you got a point of order?
Thank you, President. I have a point of order. The Speaker Wilimski just said that my group sympathizes with Hamas. All speakers of our group have said exactly the opposite. It cannot be allowed that such lies are spread in the European Parliament.
Thank you very much. The point is made. Now I give the floor to Salvatore De Meo.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you, President. Well, the images of destruction, suffering and death caused by the worrying escalation of violence in the Middle East require us to reflect. Peace cannot be built with terrorism or with violence. The serious attack by Hamas has reignited decades of political complexity and regional violence. The Middle East process requires a committed approach which involves international diplomacy, i.e. Europe as well. We need constructive dialogue, which is the only way to achieve a lasting and sustainable peace in the interests of everyone involved, including the global community. We'd like today to reiterate our commitment to a two-state solution, 2 states for 2 peoples, where security on both sides is respected. We need to work towards a future in which dialogue, comprehension and respect replace conflict and violence, because, as you all know, violence is not a solution. Violence leads only to losers and many innocent victims.
Muito obrigado. Tem agora a palavra Dan Nica.
Dan Nica now, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, Vice President Shevchovich, High Representative Borrell, Minister. We are here to say something very clear. Hamas terrorism must stop. We all saw the horrors. We all saw the images of the massacres committed in Israel. We saw the babies killed and burned. We saw what happened to the women, to the elderly people as a result of Hamas terrorism. Appalling, unacceptable things have happened. And I want to tell you something. Hundreds of people have been taken hostage. People's children have been killed. One of them thanked God for the fact that his child had been killed, because it saved her from torture by Hamas. We have seen what happens, what terrorism means, the destruction of families through this unjustified, appalling violence. Hamas terrorism must stop. Terrorism in Brussels must stop. Terrorism in France must stop.
Muito obrigado. Sergei Lagodinsky.
Sergei Lagodinsky now.
My wholehearted condolences to the victims and all those affected by the destruction of the Al-Ali Arabi hospital in Gaza, no matter how many victims they were, because even one person's life is a human life. It is tragic that missiles of Islamic Jihad and Hamas are flying over the heads of those whom Hamas has made to their hostages, and by that I don't mean Israelis, I mean Palestinians. It is tragic that instead of investing into water and sewage systems, water pipes are used to produce missiles, machinery to kill the others, and sometimes to kill one's own. It is unimaginable pain to look at photos of Israeli victims. It is tragic that Israel has no choice but defend itself. And yes, defend itself by military, because Hamas leaves Israel no other options. This war started with Hamas' inhumanity. This war will end through Israel's humanity, because yes, it is human, deeply human, to try to provide security to your civilians, but it is also human to do the utmost possible to limit the humanitarian losses in Gaza, to look for a peaceful solution beyond the current operation, and yes, look for a peaceful solution with Palestinians ultimately. This time is now time for our commonness in Europe, without hatred on the streets, and without us trying to get political benefits from supporting the masses chanting for terrorists. We need to stand together, even if it is very, very hard to be able to stand.
Muito obrigado. Tem agora a palavra François Xavier Bellamy.
Mr. Bellamy now, please. Israel has been struck to its heart. The attacks have left our continent in mourning, but even today we're hearing speeches that leave us chilled to the bone. We've heard about people talking about war crimes in relation to Hamas's attacks. But words have meaning, colleagues, and that means that Hamas is a proper army, if you say that, and it means that there's collateral damage. But no, those attacks were organised by a terrorist organisation, a terrorist Islamist organisation, and their goal was to kill as many civilians as possible. They were killing people because they were Israelis. They were killing Jews because they were Jews. Is it so difficult to say that? Those who want to defend the Palestinians in Gaza need to start by condemning Hamas. They are those who are causing this endless tragedy for civilians. What chills us is to see the fact that left-wing politicians have chosen to close their eyes to everything that we should be defending through hate and for electoral purposes. They've closed their eyes to this hate we're seeing in our countries and across the world. They need to be able to condemn it in an unnuanced and clear manner, because otherwise they'll be failing in our historic responsibility. Thank you.
Mr. Bellamy, you got a blue card from our colleague Demirel.
Ich werde auf Deutsch sprechen, deshalb bitte, genau.
I'll be speaking German. Well, thank you very much, President. Thank you, Mr. Bellamy, for allowing me to ask this question. Now, I have several times from colleagues from your party that the left are speaking in favour or playing down Hamas actions, etc. That's what you've said. But are you aware that the left in the Muslim world are those that are fighting against terrorist reactionary actions? We are not the brothers of Islamic reactionaries. It's fascist forces in Europe that are doing that. So please stop making that comparison. It's left-wing and progressive forces in Arab countries that are calling for brotherhood and peace. Thank you. Mr. Bellamy now. Colleagues. Colleague, rather. It's not me you should be asking. You should ask that question of colleagues in your political group. Why do they refuse to say that Hamas is a terrorist organisation? Why, even today, are they refusing to say that on the 7th October, what happened was a wide-scale terrorist attack? Why are they refusing to use those words? Why are they refusing to say what's clear? We're seeing Jews targeted because they're Jews. And given that, we should all together clearly denounce it with a single voice. Why are they not doing that with us today?
Muito obrigado. Tem a palavra agora Thomas Tobé.
Thomas Tobé now, please.
I förrgår nåddes vi av nyheten att terrorn återigen slagit till i...
The other day we heard about another terrorist attack in Brussels. And we saw the effects of terror on the 7th of October when Hamas conducted a barbaric attack on Israel. Israel has a right to defend itself. The Social Democrats talk about peace, and yes, we want peace, but then you should stand up for the only democracy in the Middle East and defend its right to defend itself against Hamas terror. There are 200 Israeli hostages, children, women and men who are being held in Gaza.
Próxima intervenção, Ana Michelle Asimakopoulos.
Mrs. Asimakopoulos, please.
After 4.5 years in this House, we know each other's positions on Israel and Palestine quite well. In this moment, we need to rise above these positions. And we need to speak in one voice to condemn the despicable attack on Israel by terrorist group Hamas, to recognize Israel's unequivocal right to self-defense, and Israel has my vote of confidence that this will be done and is being done in accordance with international law, to call for the immediate and unconditional release of hostages, to protect innocent civilians, to prevent a humanitarian crisis. Today, the European Parliament has a choice. We can exploit this resolution for political gain and become even more entrenched in our respective positions, or we can use this resolution to champion unity and, in doing so, lead by example. After all, if we cannot overcome our differences to combat terrorism, then when can we? Thank you.
Muito obrigado. Última intervenção, Andrei Kovacevic.
Our last speaker is Andrei Kovacevic, please.
High Representative, Minister, Commissioner, dear colleagues. Few clear points. I strongly condemn the dreadful terrorist attack that Hamas carried out against Israel. Israel has the right to defend itself against terrorism, ensuring in the international law, combating terrorism, not targeting the Palestinian civil population. We must recognise and support this right while striving for a peaceful resolution. The fight against terrorism is also our fight in the EU. While the war against Hamas is taking place, the EU must continue to provide humanitarian aid to the population of Palestine. At the same time, we need to ensure that in no way EU funding directly or indirectly support the activities of Hamas or other terrorist organisations. We cannot allow resources meet for the essential needs of Palestinians to be diverted to the violence purposes. I strongly urge the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages. It is inhumane to use innocent lives and as bargaining chips, and I fully condemn this practice. Lastly, it is essential to acknowledge and denounce the role of external actors in this conflict, the involvement of Iran in training and funding Hamas, as well as the involvement of pro-Kremlin forces in the physical support of Hamas and in the spread of propaganda and disinformation supporting Hamas further complicate the situation and cannot be accepted anymore. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We come now to the catch the eye procedure. As you know, we have votes at 12 o'clock, but fortunately we only have 36 requests under the catch the eye procedure. As you can imagine, I cannot give the floor to all of you, far from that, but let's do our best. Please stick to the allocated time. Let's begin with Zeliana Zovko. She's not in the room? Okay, so then the next on the list is Tomislav Sokol.
Thank you. On the 7th of October this year, the terrorist group Hamas committed the biggest crime in the history of Israel. Over 1,400 civilians, mostly women and seniors, were killed in the most brutal way. Mass murders, unfortunately, are not something that Israelis hadn't experienced before. Actually fear to think what would have Israelis experienced had they lost at least one of the wars that they had waged. Terrorists have been killing people in Europe in the streets for years now. Illegal migrants celebrate Hamas's crime in the camps. I see that some people here are trying to equalize the blame and speak in relative terms of what has happened. There are no buts about it. The exclusive culprit for what has happened is Hamas, that massacred civilians and is still using civilians as a living sheet. Ladies and gentlemen, it is a humane and normal thing to support Israel, to defend itself, of course, with the respect of all aspects of the humanitarian law. Also, we have to protect the security of our citizens and do so without excuses. Thank you.
Milan Brglez.
Thank you for giving me the floor.
I condemn the terrorist acts of Hamas that were done against Israeli citizens. I condemn the atrocities of Israel against the Palestinian civilians. There are no ways to support this. Israel has done atrocities as well, which cannot be justified simply because Hamas has done a terrorist attack. We need to be on the side of the victims. We cannot differentiate between victims. They all deserve our compassion, help, and support. We have to use all means to prevent these atrocities to continue. But for that, we need a diplomatic and peace process, the two-state solution, and to bring the responsible in front of the International Criminal Court that was established also with the help of the European member states.
Next speaker, Barry Andrews.
Thank you, President. I'd like to begin by condemning the atrocities carried out by Hamas, including the ongoing hostage-taking and sheltering military assets at or near key civilian infrastructure. I assert the right of Israel to defend itself, a right based in international law, specifically the UN Charter, but that same international law specifically forbids forced population transfer, collective punishment and indiscriminate targeting, including targeting of civilian infrastructure. International law is all that protects humanity in our darkest hours. I was astonished that President von der Leyen didn't take the opportunity to acknowledge the confused communications from the European Commission and the damage that's done to our credibility. The European Union should now support the UN call for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire and humanitarian corridor and take advantage of the global attention on this crisis for a real political initiative to bring peace to the region and end the cycle of violence. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, Ana Miranda.
Presidenta von der Leyen, ¿cómo es posible que dé lecciones de ética?
President von der Leyen, how is it possible that you got involved in the way you did? You took a partisan position rather than being neutral and negotiating for peace. Is the most important thing flying the Israeli flag in Brussels and visiting Netanyahu, or shouldn't it be criticising what's happening in Gaza? Mrs. von der Leyen, you should resign. Bombing of hospitals, citizens, cutting off water supplies, etc. These are crimes against humanity. Europe is being hypocritical, but you can't be hypocritical in our name. There are several resolutions from the United Nations supporting the Palestinian people, and they're not being respected. That's deplorable. Collective punishment is being carried out on the Palestinian people, and there are people who are just calling for self-determination. I fully reject the genocide in Gaza and the ethnic cleansing being carried out by Israel in Palestine. We call for a ceasefire, humanitarian corridors, and the immediate application of international humanitarian law. We need to work tirelessly for the cessation of violence in Gaza and a peaceful solution. We do not want to see any more people dead, whatever their nationality. We do not want to see this genocide in Gaza, and we don't want it, not in our name, certainly.
Thank you, Chair. The communication of the EU on the atrocities committed by Hamas were a mess. President von der Leyen, as she has done on multiple occasions, overstretched her mandate. While I personally commend her support for Israel, she bypassed the leaders of the member states. Representative Borrell did the same, and I would like to add that his position on this one is very, very sketchy. Apparently, it is difficult to even stand up for Israel with one voice. According to my book, if you stand for the rule of law, democracy and freedom, you support Israel unconditionally. The communication failure by the Commission shows again that a common European foreign policy is a fiction, a paper tiger, a dud. Why? Because there is not one EU foreign policy. Please stop acting like there is one and defund the External Action Service immediately.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, Marisa Matias.
Muito obrigada, Presidente. Sem qualquer condescendência.
Thank you very much. I fully condemn the barbarism of the terrorism attacks but we have to call for the same rigor when we talk about the crimes against humanity which were committed by Israel. Why is the suffering of the Palestinian people not the same as the suffering of Israeli people? Collective punishment being imposed on people. How many innocent people are going to have to die? Occupation, cutting off the water, cutting off electricity, forced displacement. These are all clear violations of humanitarian law. We need to call for the liberation all of the Israeli hostages, of course, but there needs to be a ceasefire and an end of the bombardments against the civilian population. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, let me express that I strongly condemn the brutal terrorist attacks carried out by Hamas, and I acknowledge Israel's rights to self-defense in line with international law. My thoughts and prayers are with the families of the victims in these difficult times. It is important to highlight that the current conflict caused by the terrorist attack can lead to the destabilisation of the entire Middle Eastern region and jeopardise the peace process generated by the Abraham Accords. Therefore, in my opinion, the only solution to prevent any future interstate conflict is through de-escalation policy and to return to the positive changes that were made previously. It is shocking to see how many pro-terror demonstrations and sympathy rallies supporting the terrorists are taking place throughout Western Europe. As terror is unacceptable, I would like to recall that in Hungary, no one is allowed to hold demonstrations promoting the cause of terrorist organisations. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So now I will allow 3 more speakers only, beginning with Andrius Kubilius.
Dear colleagues, it is not enough to say that Israel has the right to defend itself. Our position should be very clear. Hamas needs to be destroyed and eliminated as a terrorist organisation. And that should be done not only by Israel, but by all the democratic community. There is no other way, like it was done with ISIS and Al-Qaeda. Second, in our war against terrorism, the life of civilians should be protected. Humanitarian assistance for civilians should be provided. But there is no way how Hamas can be destroyed in a peaceful way. There is no miracle solution. There will be collateral damage and victims, but that is the price of our war against terrorism. Today, the alternative is very clear. Either we shall destroy terrorism, or terrorism will destroy us.
Much. Next speaker, Kostas Mavridis.
Thank you, President. Today we condemn the despicable Hamas terrorist attacks. No excuses, no tolerance. Today we stand in line with the right of Israel for self-defense. Today we say clearly and strongly, jihadist Hamas is not Palestine. Given that Israel is a democratic state, I'm appealing once again to the new unity government to accept the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court so that humanitarian law prevails and serves as a deterrent for any war crimes or crimes against humanity. As far as last night's bombardment of the hospital, whoever is responsible or are responsible, intentionally or not, they have innocent blood on their hands. That's why we should leave politics aside and stay with international law and the right for self-defense for Israel.
Thank you very much. Now I give the floor to Frédéric Ries.
Pardon, merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. President. Never again. That was the promise to the survivors of Auschwitz and Buchenwald. Never again. That was the promise of the founding fathers who built what they built on the ruins. The 7th of October pogrom was the worst since the Holocaust. But what is vital is that we call things by their proper name. This was a vicious terrorist attack. 1,400 to 1,500 victims in Israel. It's very important for us to get our words right. Silence kills. Whether it's over there or in Arras or in Brussels. It is vital now to rebuild hope.
Very much. We come now to the closing statements, starting with Vice President of the European Commission, Maros Šefčovič.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, Mr. Minister, High Representative, honourable members of the European Parliament. We are about to conclude one of the most important and most emotional debates in this hemicycle. And rightly so, because it just demonstrates our shock and horror over Hamas terrorist attacks in Israel and the terrorist attacks here in Europe, in Belgium and in France. And I clearly felt that we are united in the condemnations in the strongest possible terms of Hamas and its brutal terrorist attacks. Our debate also underlined our compassion for innocent civilian victims in Israel and Gaza. And I very much appreciate your overwhelming support for the right of Israel to self-defense in line with the international humanitarian law. We in the Commission hear you loud and clear when you call for addressing humanitarian crisis in Gaza. Humanitarian aid must urgently reach Palestinians. We tripled our humanitarian aid to civilians in Gaza. We opened EU air bridge to Egypt, and our staff, to whom I would like to thank for their dedication and service, is already on the ground to work with UN agencies to ensure that this aid can reach those in need. Honourable members, we also hear you loud and clear when you call for unrelenting diplomacy. In a moment, Foreign Minister Alvarez and High Representative Borrell will address you. I can assure you that we will spare no effort to work for release of hostages taken by barbaric Hamas and fight terrorism everywhere, in the Middle East, in Europe, or in the wider world. But we also hear you loud and clear when you state that the indiscriminate and brutal terrorist attacks against Israel and its people by Hamas directly threaten peace and security in the region. And also the way how you underline the need for renewed efforts to reinvigorate the Middle East peace process. As you know very well, the EU is first and foremost a peace project. Therefore, it's clear that we remain strongly committed to lasting and sustainable peace in the Middle Eastern region. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now I give the floor to Minister José Manuel Álvarez Bueno.
Gracias, Presidente.
Thank you very much indeed, President, President of the Commission, High Representative. We are poised to conclude this debate at a time which is so serious for the whole world, and our friends throughout the globe as well as our citizens, need to stand united in firmly condemning the terrorist attack sustained by Israel and its right to defend itself at the present time, as well as on the need to defend international law and to preserve and safeguard the civilian population, as well as calling for the immediate and unreserved release of all our compatriots, Ivana Remendi, and also making sure that humanitarian assistance can be afforded to the Palestinian people, as well as what they need to survive. The European Union, of course, rallies around those principles because they underpin our European political identity, and that is why it is so important that we all understand that one cannot conflate Hamas, which is merely a terrorist organization, with the legitimate leadership of the Palestinian people, which for decades now has been our partner for peace. If we undermine that authority, then that would be deleterious not only for the Palestinians, also for the Israelis and for ourselves. And that is why the Spanish government is going to step up its assistance to the Palestinian Authority, as well as to UNRWA and all of the civil society organizations, because we cannot countenance anybody exploiting this tragedy for their own personal ends. Here today, one of the Spanish MEPs spread untruths about the robust stand of the Spanish government at this time. It behoves us all to behave with the highest degree of responsibility, to contribute to de-escalating the tension and to do our bit to foster dialogue, because all of us wish to avoid any expansion of the conflict. We have a clear United Nations framework, and the Spanish government stands foursquare behind that framework, and that is why we must stand with all of our Arab friends in the region. There was another plea that I heard today in the chamber repeatedly, and one which I echoed repeatedly in my introductory statement, and that is that we try to push for a two-state solution. An Israeli and a Palestinian state which recognize one another as neighbors, as partners for prosperity, and which would also enjoy recognition from the international community. Let's get down to work and let's make that a reality, and let's make a reality of peace in the Middle East. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Minister, for your intervention on behalf of the Spanish Presidency. And now to conclude our debate, I give the floor to Vice President and High Representative Josep Borrell. You've got the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you to all the members that has participated in this debate. Señorías, hace pocos...
Ladies and gentlemen, a couple of weeks ago actually, I was in Babi Yar. Babi Yar is an area close to Kiev in Ukraine, where in 1941 the Nazis executed 33,700 plus individuals. They took them there, making them to believe that they were going to leave for Palestine. And when they arrived at Babi Yar, they simply shot them. Those, along with numerous other hundreds of thousands of people, died during the Nazi occupation of Ukraine. I shared a moment of remembrance with the rabbi, which keeps alive the flame of memory of Babi Yar. And I said what I said. Nothing appears to me more horrific than to murder people because they pertain to some religious group, some confession, some group in general, be it Jew, Muslim, Christian. We are all human beings, and in Europe, we've made this this is our raison d'être, to reject that which what the Holocaust was and the whole ideology behind it. So this memory, and in our terrible conscience with regard to this, because it was some of us, that conducted these acts. Now this moment in Babi Yar at nighttime, recognizing the terrible burden of guilt that we bear vis-à-vis the Jewish people, and in expressing our support as well for the State of Israel. And I say that to all those who believe that when a tragedy, that one tragedy is more terrible than another, to reject both tragedies. No, there's a type of distancing, if you like, from the suffering of the people of Israel, now and before. So what took place these days, what has taken place these days in Israel, was a terrible shock for the people of Israel. Terrible indeed. 1,300 dead in one day. It is the most terrible event since the second Intifada in 2000 for the State of Israel. 1,300, when you take that in proportional figures, that would be thousands more in France, for example. So you can understand the seriousness of this issue. So Israel has not experienced a moment of trauma of such depth in the recent past. One of the most darkest days in the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, and it is the beginning of a new chapter in this conflict as well. We could say that we are entering the fifth chapter, although there have been two projects up until now, in the beginning of the 1990s, for reconciliation, that is, and then a second one, but that was followed by confrontation until 1946, and then the conventional wars between Israel and the Israeli states between 46 and 86, and then the fourth act of this tragedy, the re-Palestinization of the conflict, as is said by academics, the Intifada, the various rebellions, the negotiations between Fatah and Yitzhak Rabin in Oslo, with the Oslo Accords. Now we're entering this fifth stage that may be darker than all the previous, if the international community does not stop this. And the international community has to do something, because it was the international community that has created this entire stage, to a certain extent, of this conflict, since the United Nations decided in the 1947-1948 division, the Palestinian Mandate, the whole division that took place in that area, the establishment of the borders, and the Security Council resolutions that stated quite clearly what ought to be done and what not to be done. So it's international law which is the only source of a common language which allows us to deal with this particular conflict, because the first thing that we need is a common language. Otherwise, it is not possible to have any sort of dialogue whatsoever. So history has shown us that the most difficult decisions are taken when we're at the edge of the abyss. And I think we're at that point right now, ladies and gentlemen. When we hear religious Muslims speaking about the interreligious conflict and mentioning specifically Europe on this point as part of this particular conflict, it makes me feel that we have a terrible storm, what that is before us, that we must stop. And you saw how this has all been swirled into emotion as well, going beyond emotion, actually. And we will not be able to resolve this conflict until we come to our senses. So let's not correct an error with another error or attempt to do that. We have false descriptions of what's taking place, fake news, and we're trying to we're trying to really understand now what is manipulation and what isn't. Not error with error. Not those who have been decapitated, because this is information which has not been confirmed. And actually that has been confirmed by the Israeli army as well. So the Western world has to kind of step back, because we don't need to make another mistake. There are already enough mistakes that have been made out there. Because to kill 1,300 people in 24 hours, you have to go and try to find them in their places of hiding in the most bloody fashion. So you don't need to add anything more to that. We have enough with what has already happened, but in the same way that we can say that is an abominable tragedy to kill 270 individuals who are celebrating life, we can't say that it's not less of a tragedy for 780 plus children to die under bombs that have been dropped on Gaza. So you simply have to be able to bring all this together and understand. So to condemn one thing, that ability I have, that is if I can condemn something which is equally terrible, which is done by other people, which may be actually closer to me. And if we don't understand this, we cannot be useful in order to try to resolve this horrific conflict. And for that reason, I'd also like to tell you, stop saying that we are subsidizing Hamas terrorism. Stop saying that with our money we're paying for the social system that goes to Palestinians which have been convicted of crimes. That is not true. We have a system of control, of monitoring where our money goes, and it works well. We control where our resources are going, and it's at the disposal of the Commission. You can take a look at it, but stop saying things that are not true. Because quite to the contrary, it just simply agitates the whole atmosphere of the situation. And allow me to say that the criticism, why I haven't gone to Israel, that's been exercised up until now. Why haven't I gone up until now? I think I am one of the European politicians that has done most in order to deal with the situation in Israel. And the meeting of the Association Council with Israel, which many years, 10 years, which has not taken place. It simply hasn't met. And I pushed for this to take place because I felt it was absolutely necessary to have dialogue with the Israeli government at this point in time. And I've spoken a number of occasions with the ministers of foreign affairs for them to come to Brussels, and they've done that to discuss this issue. I've taken major initiatives in order to relaunch the peace effort in the United Nations, more specifically, with UNRWA as well present. And also, we had established dates and deadlines. And I do hope to be able to move forward. But fundamental conditions, if I'm to visit Israel, would mean that I would also be able to visit Ramallah, the West Bank. So with the emotion of the days that we've had, I think, well, it's not only by going there that one occupies oneself with the problems, and I don't criticize anybody that's done that, and I will not be drawn into some sort of interinstitutional debate, because what we need here is a concerted effort. We need to work together. Hamas is a terrorist organization. It has to be fought. And Israel has the right to defense. And it has to be able to do this defense, if you like, within the framework of international law. And we have a lot to work on in this particular direction. So as soon as we've accepted this premise, we'll be able to work together more effectively. So I hope to be able to visit Israel, but I can't tell you what the member states have to say, and with their they've communicated with the countries of the Gulf that they suspend the various provisions for water. I'm sorry, that is contrary to international law, but we can't do that. We cannot do this. We cannot accept these things as such. Things have to be taken into consideration when we evaluate this conflict. And look at the dictionary of humanitarian practice, that the provision of water and depriving a community of water goes contrary to international law in Ukraine and in Gaza as well. And if we're not able to do that or to in both places, indeed we lose that moral authority if we're not able to really underscore and emphasize this. Thank you very much.
Representative Borrell, I have received 7 motions for resolution to wind up this debate. The debate is now closed and the vote will be held tomorrow.